All right, deep divers, ready to dig in. Today we're tackling this hefty policy document, A New Way Forward,
Catchy.
right? But it's also making some big promises like lower costs and more opportunity. We're going to see if they hold water.
Yeah, and what's interesting is they don't shy away from inflation. They
Hmm.
actually talk about how it's hitting people right now.
Yeah, they get into specifics too, like cutting taxes, over 100 million Americans apparently, working families, middle class, that's who they're talking about.
And that's a stark contrast, actually, from the analyses we've seen, suggesting the other plan could mean families paying, get this, $4,000 more per year.
$4,000. Whoa, that's a huge difference. What's their justification for that?
Well, they're saying that essentially their tax plan, it wouldn't be a direct tax hike, but it would likely lead to higher prices for everyday stuff, not just luxury items.
Okay, so much for those campaign promises, huh? But all right, let's move past taxes for a sec. What else are they targeting in this cost-cutting mission of theirs?
Food prices are a big one. They're really pushing for more resilient supply chains.
Oh, like not having all our eggs in one basket, so to speak.
Exactly. They use this example, like imagine if a drought in just one state could make grocery bills go up across the entire country.
Oh, like what happened with mention a relevant recent event, those empty shelves, total chaos.
Exactly. So they want to make sure we're not as vulnerable to those kinds of disruptions in the future.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about healthcare? Because let's be real, that's a big one for everyone's budget. What's the plan there?
One thing that stood out to me, they want to make that $35 a month insulin cap permanent.
Now that would be huge.
Right.
Insulin's not a luxury. It's life or death for millions.
Absolutely. That's the type of change that could make a real difference.
Okay, so we've got food, healthcare, what else? Or should I say, what about opportunities? We've talked about saving money, but what about making it? What's the grand plan there?
So this is where the whole opportunity economy thing comes in. I've got three main areas: housing, small businesses, and then workforce development. And the idea here is it's not just about quick fixes, but actually helping people move up long term.
All right, so let's break those down a bit. Starting with housing, what's their big idea?
They want to build 3 million homes. That's their goal.
3 million. That's a lot of houses. How do they even plan on doing that?
That's a million-dollar question. They mentioned streamlining the whole permitting process and giving incentives for construction, but the specifics are a little vague. We're talking zoning laws, building codes. It gets complicated.
Yeah, because building a house is a tad more complicated than assembling some IKEA furniture, right?
Right.
But okay, say they build all these houses. How do they make sure they're actually affordable, for the people who need them?
So they have this proposal, $25,000 in down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers.
25 grand. That's not too shabby. But I'm guessing there's some fine print there, right?
Oh, definitely. It's not for everyone. They're looking for people with a 2-year history of on-time rent payments, so showing they're responsible.
Makes sense. They want to set people up for success. All right, so that's housing. What about small businesses? Because they're kind of the backbone of the economy, right?
Yeah, and get this, they're aiming for 25 million new businesses.
25 million. That's a lot of like Etsy shops and food trucks popping up. Are there even that many business licenses? But okay, how do they plan to make that happen?
Well, they want to really boost that startup expense tax deduction by tenfold, actually. That could be huge for new businesses. And they also talk about cutting back on the red tape all those regulations that can be a real pain.
Less paperwork, more grand openings, right.
Yeah.
But I mean, tax breaks are great and all, but is there anything about actual support, like mentorship or helping them get loans and stuff?
That's a good point, and honestly, that's where it gets a little fuzzy. They mentioned creating a good environment for businesses, but the specifics, we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, so we've got these ambitious goals for housing and for small businesses, but what about the people, right? The ones actually working in those businesses. What's the plan for workforce development?
Well, they're really pushing for skills over degrees.
Right.
Like recognizing that a 4-year degree isn't the only path to a good job.
Yeah, it's about time, right? But do they get into specifics? Like, what industries are they talking about? What kind of skills are in demand?
Manufacturing is a big one. They're betting on American manufacturing making a comeback, especially in areas like clean energy, biotech, those kinds of things. The industries of the future.
We hear that a lot, though, right? Revitalizing American manufacturing. Sounds good, but how do they actually plan to make it happen this time?
Well, they talk about these big investments they're making. Things like the infrastructure law and the HES Act. They mention those specifically.
Right, right. Putting their money where their mouth is.
Exactly. The idea being that this will create jobs, obviously, but also make the U.S. more competitive globally.
Okay, so that's the big picture stuff, but what about the workers themselves? Are there any programs to actually help people get these manufacturing jobs?
Yeah, they talk about apprenticeships, skills-based hiring, even getting rid of those degree requirements for some federal jobs. It's about making it easier for people to get the skills they need, even without a traditional college degree.
That's huge, especially these days when college is so expensive. But are they actually laying out a clear path? So it's not just empty promises.
That's the key, right?
Huh.
There's one thing to talk about it, but they need to back it up with details, specific training programs, partnerships with companies, stuff like that.
Because a job without a future, that's not really helping anyone.
Okay, but it's not just about factories and tech and all that, right?
Yeah.
What about the care economy?
Yeah.
The people taking care of kids, aging parents, all that.
Absolutely. And they actually spend a good chunk of the document talking about that. They seem to get that affordable childcare, elder care, all of that. It's crucial. It's about time somebody did. Because if parents can't afford childcare, they can't work, right?
Yeah,
And if people are struggling to care for their parents or whatever, it impacts everything.
exactly. And they actually proposed some pretty big changes, expanded tax credits for families with young kids, more affordable childcare options, even paid family leave.
Paid family leave, wouldn't that be nice?
Right.
But that stuff's expensive, so where's all the money coming from?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they do have a whole section on their fiscal approach, but even with all the jargon, it's still a bit of a balancing act.
All right, deep divers, time to get those calculators out. But before we dive into that, there's one more thing we got to talk about. Economic inequality. They talk about opportunity, but do they actually address the systemic stuff, the things that keep people stuck?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Hmm.
Their argument is that this whole opportunity economy thing, it's designed to level the playing field, basically.
So it's not just about pulling people out of poverty, but actually changing the system itself.
That's the idea, at least. They talk about empowering communities that have been left behind, especially rural areas and communities of color, more access to capital, supporting minority-owned businesses, that kind of thing.
Oh, it sounds good, but how do you measure that? How do you actually fix a system that's been broken for so long?
Right, and to be honest, they don't give all the answers.
Mhm.
It's going to take more than just good intentions, right?
We need to see the receipts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Concrete plans, measurable goals, the whole 9 yards.
We can't just put a Band-Aid on this, right? This plan might be a step, but we gotta hold their feet to the fire.
100%. It's easy to get caught up in the promises, but we got to stay vigilant. Demand accountability.
Well said. Okay, deep divers, it's time to put on our accountant hats and dive into these numbers. Can they actually pay for all of this? Let's find out. All right, deep divers, so it's time to talk money. Can they actually pay for all this?
The million-dollar question, right?
Well, more like $1 trillion, but yeah. They're saying no new taxes for anyone making under 400 grand. That was a big promise. So how do they fund all this without that revenue?
They're going after what they call tax loopholes, which basically means, the ways that wealthy people and corporations avoid paying taxes.
Right, right. Like those offshore accounts everyone's always talking about.
Exactly. And those inheritance tricks, the super rich use, that kind of thing.
Okay, but those loopholes always sound easier to close in theory than in reality, don't they?
Well, yeah, there's a reason those loopholes exist. Powerful lobbies, you know how it is.
Mhm.
But they do actually get kind of specific in the document. They name names, you know what I mean? Like specific loopholes they'd target.
Oh, so they did their homework, huh? It's one thing to say it, another to actually put it in writing. But even if they manage to close all those loopholes, is that enough to fund, like, this entire agenda?
That's the big unknown. We'll need to see those independent analyses, see if the numbers really add up. And even then, there are always surprises, right? The economy could tank. Who knows?
Yeah. Exactly. Governing's not exactly predictable. Okay, deep divers. So we've reached the end of our deep dive. What have we learned? What should our listeners be thinking about?
I'd say the most important thing is don't just take our word for it. Go read the document, see for yourself. Check out those independent analyses we talked about, compare their promises to their track record, and, don't be afraid to ask those tough questions.
Exactly. Don't just listen to the slogans and the sound bites. Dig in, see what's really going on, and then you can decide for yourself if this new way forward is the right path, right? All right, deep divers, that's it for us this time. Until next time, stay curious.